If you follow the rules, then you collect good karma, and good karma allows you to be reincarnated at a higher level in the next life. The rules include being kind and compassionate to others, performing the rituals to the gods, and meditating. Over many lives, you can move up from being an animal to being a low caste person to being a high caste person. Finally, you reach moksha, when you are free from the hardships of the cycle of birth and death. For some Hindus, this means your soul is reunited with the soul of the whole universe, or it becomes one with God. Siddhartha rejected some parts of Hinduism that he thought were wrong. He created his own religion, now called Buddhism. We don't know very much about Siddhartha's life, but we believe he lived from about 560 to about 480 BCE. And we think he was born in Lumbini, in what is now Nepal. According to one legend, Siddhartha was born a prince. His mother, Queen Maya, died a few days after his birth. Siddhartha's father was very protective of him and had 3 palaces specially built in his son's honour. The idea was that Siddhartha would live all his life in these palaces. That way he would be hidden away from the poor, desperate lives led by most people. But at the age of 29, Siddhartha's curiosity to see the world for himself overcame him, so he sneaked out of the palace and he met old people and people with diseases and people who were dying. He was so upset by what he saw that he decided to leave his luxuries behind and join the ordinary people in their suffering. This period in northern India is called the second period of urbanization. City-states covered the area along the Ganges River. The time was full of thinkers, much like the 100 schools of thought in China. In Hinduism, one of the new ideas was an important way to live a holy life is to become what's called ascetic. Ascetics give up all possessions, pleasures, and family connections. They focus entirely on prayer and meditation. Siddhartha decided to become an ascetic. At one point, he ate no more than a single leaf or nut a day and almost starved to death. This is obviously not a good idea, and Siddhartha figured that out in time. He concluded that starving himself was adding suffering to the world, not taking it away. It is said that Siddhartha sat down under a tree to meditate for 49 days. After all this time, quietening his mind, he gained what is called enlightenment, or nirvana. He could see the truth of all things and felt lasting peace and joy. But from then on, he was known as the Buddha, meaning awakened one. The Buddha said that all people are equal and that castes don't matter. He also stopped thinking about karma and earning points for the next life, but he continued to believe in reincarnation and the importance of meditation and selflessness. He taught a middle way between a life of always wanting more and a life of rejecting everything. He believed that if you were kind and compassionate to others, meditated to stay calm, and lived simply, you could find your way to nirvana. For the next 45 years, the Buddha walked along the Ganges River in what is now northeast India and southern Nepal. He talked to everyone who would listen, from kings and queens to robbers and beggars. He explained to them that anyone can gain enlightenment. After attracting thousands of followers, the Buddha died at about the age of 80. Some rulers were afraid of Buddhism and other new ideas popping up at the time, so they tried to stop them. Others put up with them. But then something amazing happened that started the process of making Buddhism the major religion it is today. About 200 years after the death of the Buddha, the Maurya Empire unified India by conquering all its different kingdoms. This was about the same time as high-carbon steel was being invented. The third Maurya king was named Ashoka. When he came to power in about 260 BCE, there was just one undefeated kingdom left. It was called Kalinga, and of course Ashoka attacked the Kalingans. The last battle in what is known as the Battle of Kalinga. According to some stories, it left more than 100,000 people dead on the battlefield. The day after winning the battle, it is said that Ashoka walked out across the city. All he saw were burned out houses, dead horses, and scattered bodies. Ashoka was a very tough guy. His name even means without sorrow, but the sight of all this carnage is said to have made him weep and cry. What have I done? Horrified at the appalling loss of life, Ashoka became a Buddhist, and over the next 20 years he tried to help his people live in peace. The best information we have about King Ashoka is from a collection of instructions to his subjects that he had carved into pillars and rocks all around his kingdom. They are called the Edicts of Ashoka. In them, he asked people to be kind and generous to others, to work to improve themselves, to be honest, and to be grateful. Following Ashoka's reign, Buddhism spread to many other countries. His children, Mahinda and Sagmathira, took Buddhist teachings to what is now Sri Lanka. By 100 CE, Buddhist monks had reached China, and from China the religion spread throughout Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, and eventually into Japan. Nowadays, more people practice Buddhism in other countries than in India itself. About 40 years after King Ashoka finished bringing together all of India, a warrior named Ying Zheng led the Chinese state of Qin in defeating the rest of China. When Ying became emperor in 221 BCE, he took the name Qin Shi Huang, which means first emperor of China. Qin Shi Huang wanted to make sure the country didn't fall apart again, so he took back power from the nobles and built up a strong army. He also ordered a set of walls to the north of some Chinese states to be connected together. The idea was to defend the country against attacks from nomads. This job took thousands of workers and long after his death became the Great Wall of China. Qin Shi Huang decided that China needed shared systems to make it easy for different parts of the empire to work well together. He created money that could be used all over the country and ordered a system of standard weights and measures to make trade easier. He also created a written language that would allow educated people to communicate clearly with one another. The emperor rejected almost all ideas from the 100 schools of thought. The one he kept was called legalism. It worked for him because it upheld the emperor's right to harshly punish or even kill anyone who disobeyed him. Other ideas, including those of Confucius, were strongly discouraged. As you might imagine, not everyone liked Qin Shi Huang. In fact, he survived several attempts to kill him. As he got older, the emperor became more desperate to find a magic potion that would make him live forever. Remember the story of King Gilgamesh from Sumeria, who went searching for the same thing? Qin Shi Huang was on a tour of eastern China looking for this potion when he died. It's thought that his doctors made up some pills which they believed would give everlasting life. Unfortunately, they contained mercury, a highly poisonous metal. For over 2,000 years, no one knew where Qin Shi Huang was buried. Then, one day in 1974, some farmers who were digging a well struck an unusual object buried deep underground. What they found led to one of the most incredible archaeological discoveries of all time. It was an enormous necropolis, or tomb city, that took up 98 square kilometres. That's as big as the city of Coventry in England. when archaeologists dug up part of the necropolis, they found a huge army of clay soldiers. Like the Shabti of the Egyptians, these figures were meant to help the emperor in the next life. But these aren't miniature figures. These are life-size statues, at least 8,000 of them, and each soldier is an individual work of art. They are made of terracotta, a kind of red clay, and they carry bronze weapons and are lined up all ready for battle. And with the soldiers are 600 clay horses and more than 100 life-size wooden chariots. By 100 BCE, both China and India were at peace, but sadly humans are not that good at making peace last. In fact, that's exactly what we're about to see as we turn our gaze towards Europe and the Middle East, where several of the world's greatest classical civilizations are in full swing. Rise and fall. Do you like olives? When I was young, I used to stay at a fine old English house that belonged to my great-uncle and namesake. I remember he always offered us olives in front of his roaring log fire before dinner, and I still love olives, maybe because they remind me of Uncle Christo. Olives were first farmed by the people of ancient Greece. They were a very important crop. Ancient Greeks didn't have iron ploughs the way the Chinese did, and they didn't have the rich soil of China either. So it was harder to make a living from farming grains like wheat, barley or rice. Olive trees grew well, though olives mattered. That's because everyone wanted olive oil. It was as precious as gold is today. Squeeze out the oil from olives, and you can use it for lighting lamps to see in the dark, for cooking food, or even to make soap for scrubbing yourself free of grime. You could also trade your olives to buy something that meant you would never again need to work in the fields, and you'd never need to make your bed, or even do the washing up after dinner. Can you tell what that incredible something was? The answer might be pretty disturbing, and it ought to be, because that incredible thing that could do all your work for you was another person, a slave. In all of ancient Greece, we know the most about the city-state of Athens, and that's because so much was written about it. The state of Athens included both the city itself and the surrounding countryside. In Athens, and probably in other places in Greece, two opposite ideas seemed to go hand in hand. One was democracy, and the other was slavery. It is one of the saddest truths of human history that millions of people have had to spend their lives enslaved. Being enslaved means having to work without pay and to be treated with harsh, often cruel disrespect by people who think that you are worth a lot less than they are. In ancient Greece, every free family who could possibly afford it had slaves, and in fact not having even one slave was a mark of extreme poverty. Enslaved people worked on farms and in people's houses. They also built buildings and roads, made pottery and mined metals. And not only families and businesses owned slaves, the government of Athens did too. It rented them out to companies, and the money that they made went to pay the government's bills. Until about 600 BCE, in Athens, anybody could be enslaved. All you have to do is fall on hard times and take a loan you couldn't repay. Or you might be travelling and be kidnapped and sold into slavery in another country. Or you could be captured in war, and that made people very aware of their freedom and very nervous when they felt it was being taken away. In about 594 BCE, a new leader came into power in Athens. His name was Solon, and according to the stories told about him much later, he was a great warrior and poet. Solon is famous for making some very big changes. One thing Solon did was to set up a system where all citizens could vote to decide exactly what the government should do. and this is called democracy. Other Greek states also set up the direct democracies. It was an exciting moment if you were a citizen of Athens, but there was one catch. You only counted as a citizen if you were free, male, Athenian, and rich enough to own property. If you were a slave, female, foreign, or poor, forget it. So actually, most people foreign from another country. So actually, most people who lived in Athens couldn't vote. But the idea of elections in which people had a say and the origins of democracy did begin right here. Because they had so many slaves, Athenian citizens had something worth even more than olive oil. They had time, bags and bags of it. Because other people were doing all the hard work, Athenian men could use their time to learn, think, write, invent and discover. They even had time to go to giant outdoor theatres to see plays performed and listen to storytellers. Some of the most famous ancient Greek stories were written by the poet Homer. In his book-length poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, he tells of the legendary Trojan Wars, which are supposed to have taken place around 1260 to 1180 BCE in what is now Greece and Turkey. You might know one of the stories. According to Homer, Paris, Prince of Troy, kidnapped Helen, Queen of Sparta. Sparta was a city-state of Greece, so Greece went to war with Troy to get Helen back, and they came up with a clever trick. They built a huge wooden horse and hid a team of crack troops inside it. Oh, yes. Naturally, the Trojans were very curious about this giant horse parked outside their city walls, so they dragged it into the city to take a closer look. In the dark of night, the Greek soldiers snuck out of their hiding place, opened the gates of Troy, and let the Greek army flood in to destroy the city and its people. Homer's poetry and the work of other ancient writers also tell us about Greek religion. The Greeks believed in a group of gods known as the Pantheon. There were 12 main gods, or Olympians. Zeus was the king of the gods and the ruler of their heavenly home, Mount Olympus. Hera was the queen of the gods and the goddess of women and family. Poseidon was the god of the sea. Demeter was the goddess of nature, farming, and the seasons. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, knowledge, science, literature, and war. And the Greek myths tell the stories of these gods and their interactions with humans. Ancient Greek thinkers didn't always just follow the explanations in these myths. Thales was a Greek philosopher who lived in a city called Miletus on the west coast of what is now Turkey. It is said that in 585 BCE, he stunned his neighbours by correctly predicting that the world would be plunged into pitch darkness right in the middle of the day. The obvious explanation back then was that the gods were angry. The not-so-obvious and correct explanation was that there had been a solar eclipse. This happens when the moon passes between the earth and the sun, blocking out the daylight for a few minutes. Thales is sometimes called the father of science. He believed nature is what makes things happen, not gods, or as Zeus or Hera. And he taught that if you observe the world closely and make hypotheses and test them, you can better understand how the universe works.
20 minutes, you read the last paragraph.
In the ancient world, science and philosophy were closely related. They both have to do with how the world works.
When it goes to that
Yep.
side, and when you say 20 minutes,
Yeah.
you have to read the rest of it.
Oh, okay. One famous Greek philosopher was Socrates. Like the Buddha, Socrates thought that a person's soul could be improved over time. But Socrates believed the way to improve yourself is not through meditation, but through problem solving, discussion, and debate. The original Olympic Games started back as far as 776 BCE, and the Games were a series of athletic competitions among the great Greek city-states. Athletes ran and jumped and rode horses in honor of their gods, the Olympians. All wars paused to let competitors pass through the battlements on their way to the games. Poems were written about the winners and the statues made in their honour. The most prestigious prize was a crown made from the leaves of that most precious tree of all, the olive. Not all Greek city-states were the same. While Athens was developing democracy and philosophy, Sparta was more interested in military might. There, baby boys were inspected to see if they were strong enough to become soldiers, and the weakest were abandoned and left to die on the lonely slopes of a nearby mountain range. If you were a boy who made it to the age of 7, you were sent off to military training camp to learn how to become a fearless warrior. There, you weren't fed enough at meals. The idea was that you learnt to steal. However, if you were caught stealing, you would be punished because you were too clumsy to get away undetected. Girls in Sparta had it better. If you were a girl, you were well fed, given lots of freedom, and encouraged to take part in sports and ride horses. You were educated at home and were supposed to grow up to be a good mother to strong future warriors.